Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here with us. Today, we've got a fascinating topic lined up, one that breaks down something so essential, so fundamental to human life, that most of us do it 20,000 times a day without even a single thought. We're talking about breathing. But more specifically, we're going to visually dissect the mechanics of asthma and its impact on daily breathing. If you love structured, clear learning as much as I do, you are going to get a lot out of this today. So why does a simple daily breath sometimes feel like an impossible struggle? Breathing is supposed to be automatic. It's the invisible rhythm of our lives. But for millions of people navigating asthma, that invisible rhythm suddenly becomes highly visible, incredibly conscious, and honestly, incredibly difficult. Today, we're going right into the body to figure out exactly why that happens. Section 1, the complexity of asthma, and deconstructing the clinical definition. To understand the struggle, we first have to confront the scientific reality and dense pathophysiology of the disease. Let's dive straight into the clinical literature defining this condition. It reads, asthma is a heterogeneous chronic respiratory disease characterized by variable respiratory symptoms, airway inflammation. Okay, pause right there. I know exactly what you might be thinking. Right out of the gate, that is a wall of intimidating, dense clinical jargon. It sounds exactly like a textbook, doesn't it? And it continues, bronchial hyperresponsiveness and fluctuating expiratory airflow limitation. Yeah, let's just take a second and validate how overwhelming that sounds. If you're reading this trying to understand what's happening in your own body, or maybe a loved one's body, words like hyperresponsiveness aren't exactly user-friendly. But don't worry, these are complex medical concepts for sure. But I'm going to be your guide today. We're going to decode this massive sentence piece by piece. Let's pull out that very first intimidating word. Heterogeneous. By definition, it's a condition where manifestations can differ substantially between individuals. But in plain English, it just means asthma looks and acts completely differently for everyone who has it. There's literally no one-size-fits-all version of this disease. Your asthma is uniquely yours. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is exactly why it's so different for everyone. As the source material points out, asthma involves multiple overlapping factors. You have different environmental triggers and inflammatory pathways clashing with totally unique biological phenotypes and endotypes. It's a massive physiological equation, and because those variables change from person to person, the resulting disease is entirely individualized. It's really a highly personalized medical puzzle. Section 2, inside the airways, the mechanics of breathing. Let's transition from clinical confusion to mechanical clarity by looking at what actually happens inside the body. To do this, let's look at a much simpler explanation from the World Health Organization. They describe asthma as a chronic lung disease in which inflammation and muscle tightening around the airways make breathing difficult. See? Suddenly, those massive textbook words we saw earlier are translated into physical, mechanical realities we can actually visualize. Inflammation, muscle tightening. Let's break that down even further. This brilliantly illustrates that exact cause and effect chain. Step 1. Airway inflammation. That means the inner lining of the tubes carrying air swells up. Step 2, muscle tightening. The muscles wrapping around those airways begin squeezing the tubes from the outside. Step 3, difficulty breathing. I want you to imagine trying to breathe through a normal drinking straw. It's easy, right? Now imagine the inside of that straw swelling up, while simultaneously a rubber band is wrapped around the outside, squeezing it tighter and tighter. That micro-narrative of the narrowing straw, that's the deeply visceral physical reality of an asthma flare-up. So the crucial point is how this connects back to our original complex definition. Pathophysiology is simply the physical processes associated with a disease or injury. That narrowing straw, the swelling, the tightening muscle bands, that is the pathophysiology. We took that incredibly intimidating medical word and proved that it just describes the very mechanical, physical reality the WHO outlined. Which brings us back to this absolute mouthful from the clinical definition, fluctuating expiratory airflow limitation. Let's completely demystify this phrase right now. Expiratory just means breathing out. Airflow limitation means the air is blocked, and fluctuating means it comes and goes. Because of that muscle tightening and inflammation we just visualized, literal roadblocks are created inside your lungs. These roadblocks inconsistently restrict the air you're trying to exhale, leaving you feeling trapped mid-breath. Section 3, daily breathing symptoms and the lived experience. Time to connect those internal mechanics to the external world. Now that we have a crystal clear picture of the internal mechanics, let's bring it all up to the surface. How does that fluctuating airflow actually show up in everyday life? Well, the WHO gives us a very clear list of common outward symptoms: wheezing, coughing, chest tightness, and shortness of breath. When you look at this, you can clearly see the external result of those internal mechanics. The wheezing, that's the sound of air forcing its way through that narrowed, swollen straw. The chest tightness, that's the feeling of those muscles wrapping around the airways and squeezing. The internal inflammation outwardly impacts almost every single aspect of daily life. Let's see how this builds a complete picture. We have variable respiratory symptoms, the coughing, the wheezing, and we have fluctuating airflow limitation, the internal roadblocks. These two concepts perfectly mirror each other. Because the internal airflow restriction fluctuates and changes based on inflammation, the external symptoms you experience are also going to vary from day to day, or even hour to hour. The outside perfectly reflects the inside. Which brings us to a final question I want to leave you with. We've learned that asthma is heterogeneous, meaning the pathways, the triggers, the endotypes, they're all entirely unique to the individual. So what triggers your airflow limitation or the limitation of someone you care about? Understanding the general mechanics is really only the first step. The true mastery of this topic comes from reflecting on how these highly personalized mechanics operate in the real world. Thank you so much for joining me to decode this incredibly important topic. Keep asking questions, keep looking for structure in the complex, and I will see you in the next explainer.